Hello, 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 everyone out there. I hope you're doing well tonight. It is nice and cozy in DC, so this is a perfect time to have this fireside chat. My name is Michaela, and I'm your host tonight. Welcome to another Sankofa event. If you aren't familiar with us, Sankofa is a bookstore that was founded by filmmaking couple Hailey and Shariki Anagarima, and we specialize in selling books that are by and about people of African descent. So it is Women's History Month, and it is awesome that we get to host the author of Life, I Swear, which is perfect because we want to center, of course, women's stories during Women's History Month and 365. So we're so happy to be joined by the author and podcast host Chloe Louvouezo to discuss her book, Life, I Swear. And later we'll be treated to a reading by healer and contributor to this book, Gabrielle Williams. So before we begin our chat, I want to make sure you all know that we will have a Q&A session at the end. So we definitely want to hear your stories. Tonight is about sharing. It's about being close. It's about healing. So I hope you all feel free to join in that conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Miss Chloe right now. Hi there. How are you?
Hi, I am well. How are you doing?
I'm excellent. I didn't speak about your book and what the topic was about yet because I want to let you
Mm.
introduce what it is you want the premise to be for people to start understanding what your book is about for those who don't already have it. And for those who don't have it, just remember you can also purchase it at sankofa.com. Don't forget.
Yes, I love the plug. And Sankofa, Sankofa as a bookstore, thank you so much for having me. Michaela, thank you so much for being willing to be in conversation. Sankofa's it's a friend of my experience because I went to Howard, and so Sankofa was of course across the street. So it seemed like a natural selection. But the book, Life I Swear, it really started out of the intention to unpack my own stories for myself, starting first. And I do think that that's also why I started the book's theme with identity, because I think that in order to explore the world um, more whole, like with a fuller perspective, it's important for us to first look inward before we assess, we measure, we judge ourselves or the world as we think of our lens looking outward. And so that interpersonal journey was really important for me as a first step to both telling all of these stories as a collective, but a first step in my process of making the book come together. And I wrote it in an extremely, I'd say, sensitive time of my life, which was just a few years ago.
Right.
And I do think that, one of my intentions in any kind of journaling that I do is really to humanize myself, because so often we're so hard on ourselves. And I appreciate being able to talk about this during Women's History Month because when we think of Women's History Month, we think of the strength of the women who have come before us, the things they've endured, the glass ceilings they've broken through. Um, we just think of this muscle that they've been able to exercise, which you know has of course laid the precedent for us, and has laid an important and necessary foundation. But I think when we think about that strength, we don't often balance it with the fragility of life, the realities of our insecurities or of our sensitivities. And I think those are the things that make every woman really human and raw and real. And I want to be able to celebrate both dualities of women, and hopefully that'll re allow us to reimagine what strength looks like, or how we kind of measure it, especially when we're measuring ourselves against that, which can be just so unrealistic and unfair to ourselves. And so that was my intent when I wrote my own essays. But it was such a healing exercise for me that I wanted to make it a collection of women's testimonials, women's journeys, reflections. We all have a testimony, and I feel like we don't really get the wisdom and the gold of the testimony until or unless we're able to be vulnerable in telling those stories
Wow.
of our pains and our joys. And so I just think it telling the full scope of Black women's stories on identity, healing, and self-trust can't be told by just one woman. And I knew that, while I could write a book and I have stories on stories on stories,
Mhm.
it would just be so much more powerful when we are able to really frame it as really a dynamic anthology that reflects how diverse and nuanced and complicated we all are, but also how beautiful and delicate and strong that can be when told as a whole.
That is so deep. Yeah, that sounds like you are truly giving us uh, the whole three-dimensional experience of being a woman, and that's why this collection is so important.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're ready for us to get into the conversation, or did you want to do a reading
Sure.
first? How you feeling?
Sure. As I thought about a reading, there is a reading that I recently read that I hadn't read since I wrote and edited it. So it feels new again to me. But I will go ahead and read an essay or an excerpt of my first essay, which the essay is titled "The Space We Deserve." And I might be choppy because it's been a while since I've revisited this, but it took me a while to get to a place of grace and acceptance that comes from self examination. I was wary of what might become of my sense of self if I looked too closely at some hard truths about my traumas and immaturities. Finding our bearings and being vulnerable enough to examine and share our wounds before they are healed is an act of courage that I wasn't prepared for. Sharing prematurely bears the risk of re-triggering ourselves. So for years, I kept my stories to myself, swept away in the dusty corners of my memory, waiting until the day I felt fully resolved with them to be qualified to share. I've learned, though, through less compartmentalization and more flow, that you can, in fact, be a mess and a messenger at the same time. You can, in fact, need healing while also helping others heal. You can be proud of your growth while also needing to be inspired, redirected, or humbled. You can struggle with the ambiguity of the future, but still honor the essence of who you are, which is often the only thing we know for sure. And you can wonder, in disillusionment of God's plan, why me? Why this? While still being supremely grateful for her omnipresence. The expectation of strength being antonymous to still working through our fragilities can pressure us to bottle in how we are processing life and can lead to self doubt siloed and makes intimacy through vulnerability nearly impossible.
Wow, talk about duality.
Yeah.
That is such a great message. You know,
Mhm.
a lot of women put so much pressure on themselves to be perfect. I feel like that kind of alleviates that pressure here.
Mhm.
So,
Exactly.
on our website, when you go to purchase the book, we have a short audio clip that's available, the audio version of your book.
Mhm.
And in that audio clip, you kind of talk about the preface of your book where you kind of like pack up everything and move to New York. Did I have
Mhm.
that right? So that is a big moment of pivot in your life. Can you talk
Mhm.
about that moment and maybe other moments in your life where you had to pivot?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, Man, I think pivoting is so interesting, and I do have a Life I Swear podcast, and it's so interesting that you asked that this week because I interviewed someone and I asked something similar. And in these pivots, my question that I ask myself and ask anyone else going through transitions in life is, are you running away from something or are you running towards something? And I think at different pivots have been a different answer to that. And I can say that that time in New York was it started off, the intention was running away from something because I was running away from a very challenging relationship that felt very abusive in many ways. And I had tried to leave, hadn't gotten very far, got fell back into the hands of the home that I was in. And so for me, literally leaving the city was the only way that I could mentally kind of cut ties and break those soul ties. But I think as the moment I stepped into New York was the moment I realized that I was actually running towards something, which for me, I just grew up so early in life. I had started living without my parents, away from my mother, at a very young age. I you know, when I was in this young relationship that I entered into when I was 22. I was taking care of kids. I was working. I was going to grad school. I was taking care of other people's responsibilities. And so New York to me just um, represented a freedom, which I just equate to just discovering myself and really having no agenda. And I think that was perhaps one of the most liberating pivots I've made in my life. Other pivots that I've made, I've moved from city to city very often. And so I do feel like my life has been just a series of constantly pivoting and constantly adjusting not to my physical environment, but adjusting my sense of self. Who am I in relation to this community that I'm now in, or these friendships? And so I think I've just had to acclimate into new roles and new hats as I've kind of built relationships with people and places. Um, I think, by by divine appointment, motherhood was a pivot. I think moving, packing up and moving from New York City to Rwanda was a pivot, and I think in that sense, that one was moving towards something. And usually, when I'm moving towards something, I'm really trying to discover something about myself that I haven't yet tapped into. And when I'm pivoting towards something that I haven't yet experienced, a new experience, a risk, um, something that feels daring and edgy, usually it's me wanting to kind of expand myself in new ways and knowing that, I think there's the place that between like the 20s and 30s is this season of knowing what you know, but also knowing that you don't know it all. And I define, I think, openness as just really being open for new experiences to educate me about myself, about what I think I know about the world, what I think I know about what it is to be a Black woman in the world, because so often that looks different from context to context.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, having grown up mostly in West Africa, where I looked like everyone around me, but I also went to high school in Seattle, Washington, where nearly no
Wow.
one looks like me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Black folks experience this, where we kind of coddle, or we're toggling between two environments, where we feel extremely familiar and comfortable, and where we feel extremely um, like the only one, like an outlier. And in some experiences, that can feel liberating. In some, it can feel limiting. But I do think that pivots usually happen between um, either seasons or places where we feel comfortable or where we're actually seeking to be uncomfortable.
That's right.
And I think in that leap, that's where I've had my biggest kind of leaps of growth, of personal and spiritual growth.
Wow. You've done a lot of expanding. It sounds like moving around so much, and it sounds like you also have to be really secure in yourself to
Mhm.
feel at home or to feel comfortable or to move around in these different spaces. Going
Yeah.
back to something you mentioned earlier, you talked about going inward and doing that work of self discovery, and you also journal. So, when did you realize that other people needed to hear your words or read your words? When did you realize that this was bigger than yourself?
Um, I don't think I realized it until the book came out. um, I knew I knew that well, I knew that this book was bigger than myself for my own personal selfish reasons, meaning I knew that I needed the stories of other women to
Mm,
learn from them, to kind of tilt my head and shift my perspective, because every woman that I identified to be part of this book had an experience that overlapped with my own just a little bit, but was different enough where I almost had an aha moment in reading and in receiving them. And so really, I think of this book as just my own personal tool in healing out loud, and then I shared it with the world in case it could serve other people. I think I knew that I wanted to tell through the diversity of all of the women from all of the many places across the diaspora that we're all from. I wanted to tell a broader story of and kind of break out of this monolith
yes.
identity that Black women are often kind of pigeonholed into. But being coming from such a multi-background, multi-continental, dimensional, cultural, racial background, that was like very important to me, but it didn't. And so I understood in that it was bigger than me because I can only really articulate that through a collective of essays. But the impact of the stories and the prose that are shared in the book, I didn't really it didn't really hit until after the book came out. And I had so much anxiety like leading up to the book because this is my first book. Um, and my first time sharing myself as a writer, which I never really done. You know, I think people knew that I was interested in storytelling, and I had started to explore the podcast 2 years prior, the podcast of the same name, but I hadn't really introduced myself as a creative. And so I just had a lot of nervous energy before the book came out. And as soon as the book came out, um, there was a lot of celebration for the fact that we did it. We did a book. And then I was kind of still holding my breath, wondering, okay, let me give them some time to actually read the book. But once they did, and once people really like sat with the book, it's been nothing but love. For this as a body of work that we need, And I think that it's not just a celebration of we made it to, a publishing house, but we needed these reflections of ourselves, um, particularly because it feels so timely in the last 2 years that we've all been at home. We've all been thinking about
Mhm.
identity.
Absolutely.
Um, Race falling under that, most obviously. We've been all thinking about our healing because this has been our maybe once in a lifetime chance to really do our healing work without the distractions from the world that would otherwise impose on our healing. And so I think the timeliness of this um, just really hits home for a lot of people. And it seems that there's been just such a thirst for permission for vulnerability.
Mhm.
in a way that we really didn't allow as much prior to the pandemic. But I do feel like not just in this book, but just in the like grander and more expansive Black women communities are forming, and they're creating more safe spaces to be nurtured. And I mean, and I don't think it's a trend. I think it's a necessity that we see
Yeah.
for ourselves, because without the like having to confront, um, I want to call it violence, like
Mhm.
the violent attacks of passive aggressiveness that we have to, that now we can actually set, we've been able to set up boundaries, and almost protocols for engaging with ourselves, that we're requiring other people to meet. And so even within the bubbles that we've created for ourselves and with among and with other Black women, we're really planting seeds for more of these kinds of nourishing stories to be told.
Thank you. Well, first, let me go back to say congratulations on this being your first book.
Thank
Yes.
you.
And then to say thank you for recognizing how much this can help other people and putting it out there and being like a curator of sorts and getting all those different types of stories so that women can feel seen and feel
Mhm.
humanized because it is so important. And also acknowledging that we are in the middle of a movement.
Yeah.
Our foremothers started this, I maybe it wasn't as big, and I feel like we are building on what they did.
Yeah.
Um, Going back to you talking about picking up and moving, which you mentioned, you kind of said several times that you moved here and there, and then the work that it took for you to feel okay in those situations. And you've illustrated that you are okay with just picking up and going if you feel the need to expand yourself. So, can you talk about what else you are comfortable with sacrificing to get the life that you want?
Mm. That's that's good. And um that's also a question I'm going to pose to Gabrielle when she joins us. Because I do think that, you know, comfortability comes at a price. Convenience comes at a price. And that includes convenience of our emotions. And I was just reading or listening somewhere, just the other day, about how love is a risk. And it might have been Steve Harvey on WHUR. It might have been. It could have been Frank Ski. um, but they were talking about how love is a risk. And that is very true. And I think that, for me, I've often, and I read about that in the excerpt, just it can be triggering to be vulnerable prematurely before we've like packaged ourselves up and we're pretty and after, we want to be able to talk about our pain in retrospect
Yeah.
because the questions don't feel so imposing.
Mhm.
And so, we feel more prepared to talk about it. But talking about your story in the middle of it with the people that you want to build connection with is, like, to me, the most sacred invitation for relationship. And so that applies to romantic love,
Mhm.
that applies to friendships. And I'll definitely say that I learned how to engage in romantic love through practice in my friendships because they have been such meaningful relationships in my life.
Mhm.
But what am I willing to to sacrifice and compromise? I think I'm now ready to sacrifice comfortability and convenience of my emotions, which means I'm willing to risk being vulnerable and at least a lot that's that's an invitation for someone else to meet me there, because so often we can be in relation but still be operating in our silos, and it's not there to the possibility of what that relationship could be. So I'll start there because I do believe that connection is one of the most sacred things that we have in this life, and it's something that can't be replaced. It can't be manufactured. It can't be replicated.
Mhm.
Our memories are part of how we see ourselves. They are a huge part of they're a huge element that informs who we are and how we see the world based on our relationships. And so that's something that I think I'm finally able and ready to compromise is convenience. But I'll also say, just thinking about convenience in other ways, convenience of as I think about the things I want and the creative dreams that I have. Um, those come at a cost as well. And so the convenience of the paycheck, the convenience of the stability, I really do believe that if we're going to create something that has never been created before, we can't count on the things that are part of systems to keep us in a place. And so for me as a creative, I think I was an underground creative for a really long time, a shadow artist, but I feel very like this book has been the birth of my creativity out loud. I've always been a creative, but I've like suppressed it because I have to do or live by, said rules of society. And that includes measuring success um, against parameters that, someone else's truth. But if I'm going to be authentic and seek my highest like purpose and vibration, I have to set my own parameters. And I think the discovery of truth comes at a compromise. Of convenience. And so that's something, I think this is the first season where I'm ready for that. It's
Ooh.
scary, but I am ready for
Yes, season. Yeah, I love how
that.
you how you said that. And yes, you are out here now. Like your whole face is, oh, well, not your whole face, but you're on the cover of this book. And let me just pivot to the audience real quick. In the background, you can see the cover of the book if you don't have it already. Isn't it gorgeous? Just imagine inside. Like the pictures are
Mhm.
amazing. It's really incredible and beautiful. Now, going back to what you mentioned about social constructs, can you tell us why freedom from social constructs is so essential to your life's work, your creativity, and your healing?
Mm, yes. Oh man, so when I think about when I think about, you know, just what is on the other side of pain is joy. But how can I sort of, I don't know if joy is achievable. It's something that you try and maintain. Once you, it's not a final destination. It's something that needs to be. You need to maintain it. You need to manage it. You need to nurture it. You need to like continuously ask yourself, what do I need in this moment? What brings me joy? Who do I need to connect with? What boundaries do I need to set? What lights me up? What, gives me fire? And those are kind of the things that you have to constantly ask yourself because they will continue to evolve. And I say this because this is part of my practice. It's like, okay, I had joy yesterday, but that does not mean that it's guaranteed today.
Mhm.
The way systems are set up or my anxiety is set up or healing. I don't think that we're healed. We are always healing. And
Mhm.
so I do think that there's this constant nurturing that we have to do for our joy to maintain it. But when I think about what how joy and liberation can go hand in hand for me, and joy is a kind of a catalyst for liberation and vice versa. It's really hard to do when you clock in and you're reminded of the place that you are in this greater kind of constellation of how the world works, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in, just your position in the world as a person of color or as a woman, at the intersection as a Black woman. And so I think that for me, it has been extremely difficult for me to kind of balance the this like really strong desire that I have to maintain my joy, and for me personally, maintaining it through creativity, through like full expression of self, and balancing that with the fragility that comes when my my sensitivities are constantly provoked by this greater system. And so for that reason, I think it's so important, to have community that really reaffirms and can almost allow you to exist within a microcosm.
Yes.
The reality of the world and the systems that exist, and it'll be a while before they go anywhere, if ever. But to the best of our ability, if we can, create our own alternative reality, that is real, that is affirmed, that is possible, and that is built on the possibility and the ability and capability of who we are and how we exist in this world. To me, that's the most essential tool for survival.
As you mentioned earlier, the pandemic really did shake up our vision of our life, of those social
Mm-hmm.
norms that we are living in. And it allowed us to focus on ourselves. It allowed us to ask those really important questions like, who am I? What am I doing? What do I want? What
Mm-hmm.
direction am I going in? And how am I going to get there? So I want to know, how do you feel identity is connected to that healing, or
Mm-hmm.
our trajectory on healing, and how is it interconnected?
Yeah, I see them so connected. I think of, whew, and I always have to like turn to the back of the book sometimes to just like get my inspiration from all of the women who have taught me so much around identity and healing. When I think of identity, I do think of it more broadly than race. Race is almost the through line through all of it. But our identity is really how we see ourselves, and also how we interpret the world's perception of us as well.
Mhm.
Um, but so much of that is, so much of how we see ourselves is rooted in how other people see us. And for in some contexts that can be destructive. And so that's something like how we are perceived is something we need to heal against so that we can perceive ourselves in a more like unbothered way, unbothered way, and I think, so much, and I can speak for myself, less now. I mean, definitely a little bit. But for so long, I think I kind of held myself to a standard that wasn't defined by me. It was defined by others. And in doing so, I minimized my value. That is the that's kind of how I see identity and healing, because now I have to unravel those messages I received. I have to undo, unbundle, what the world told me about myself,
That's right.
even though I also recognize that my identity, how I express myself, is very much informed by how other people kind of instill
Yes.
almost destructive messaging, that I have adapted to, and just adopted as well. And so I think that, I can't un disconnect the connection between identity and healing, particularly for marginalized communities. Part of forming an authentic identity is healing the identity that we once had, that was almost constructed based on the pillars of external factors and
Absolutely.
elements. Yeah.
That is such a great analysis. Absolutely, because it's not just how we view our identity is so layered. It's not just how we see ourselves; it's also how we see the world seeing us. And you said you know you don't speak for everyone, but I think you can speak for most, at least most Black women,
Mm,
in that how how much we have to heal ourselves from not only our own thoughts, but thoughts that we
yeah.
perceive coming at us.
Yeah.
That's why this book is so cathartic,
Mm,
because we have so many stories and examples to relate to.
thank
So my
you.
last question for you is, what is your wish for Black women, especially Black women who can
Mm.
relate to this book?
Oi, it's such a good question. I mean, for me, it's um, we do a lot of editing of our lives, as we should. We part of my own healing work is really putting on paper all of those, every narrative I've ever been told or told of myself, and giving myself the opportunity to rewrite it or restructure it in a way that tells the best of me. And I think we all deserve that. And I think when we do that, it's sort of there's a freeing that happens from that. But what I want for all of us to do, for Black women to do, is to think about, once we kind of process and progress through our own healing work, once we've kind of set aside the old narratives and really intentionally handpicked the narratives that work for us and work for the possibility of what we can become, and the footprint we are currently leaving, on the world. Once we've kind of worked past some of our stories of pain, I want us to think about, what do we do with that freedom from our past? And how are we leveraging our new perspectives? Um, and how can we share these new versions of ourselves? How can we expand, and how can we, a lot of revelations come from this very intrapersonal journey that there's this momentum that we're all embarking on. But how can we use those revelations to really carry us into new levels? And so it's so interesting, because it after writing this book, and now that I'm like flipping through it, I'm just like, man, like telling myself, like, you've been through so much. I didn't even realize. I was just writing them one essay at a time, but because it's not a kind of a through line, chronological, book or storytelling, I never really thought of my essays in this book as like one long sob story after another. Hopefully, the essays are enlightening. But now that I've actually written and published and birthed into the world some very hard truths about my past, I'm really excited to move on. Like, I'm really excited to, like, not dwell in it. And sometimes
Yeah.
we don't. Sometimes we do dwell in these like hardship stories, and a hardship kind of history of our own personal lives. Obviously, there's a different way to summarize the history of the world and Black history. But when we think about our own personal history, it's easy to dwell when we just don't have the tools to like flush it out,
Yeah, to actually heal.
Yeah. And so I really have felt like I'm flushing out, like, the bad water.
Yeah.
And so now that I'm flushed out, what green juice am I drinking now? What pure water am I drinking now that's really gonna like breathe life into me, so that I can step into each day. And so I'm really excited for all of us to do this, because I think this is a prerequisite to getting to joy and to getting to liberation and to getting to light and a freer self. But once we do that, then what?
Mhm.
Then it's almost like there's a blank canvas for us to really create and imagine, and birth new ideas into the world. And so I'm excited for us to have more conversations that lend us and lead us into the light.
Lead us into the light. I am absolutely looking forward to that next book where you talk about that. Okay. So, all of you out there, thank you again for joining us. We have Miss Gabrielle waiting in the wings to do her reading. Okay. And before she comes on, I want to remind you that we're going to have a Q&A after that. So you can start putting your questions in the comments, whether you're on Facebook, on Twitter, or on YouTube. Go ahead and start dropping those questions so I can pull them after she does her reading. So without further ado, let's bring on Miss Gabby. Hi there. Yes to the earrings.
Yes.
You're muted.
You're
You're muted. We
muted.
can't hear you yet.
Sorry. Hi, y'all. How's it going?
Hi. Good.
Great. So good to have you on. Before you do your reading, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what you're about to read?
Yeah. First of all, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is Gabrielle Williams. And I am a teacher. I am a holistic healer. I am a mom, a global citizen, etc. Yeah. Just have I got a pocket full of stories and a heart full of love, and I'm just really grateful for my friend Chloe for giving us the space to all of us the space to share our stories. So yeah, good to be here.
Thank you. So, I don't know where Michaela went, but I can moderate this.
Yeah. Oh
No, no,
no,
no. I'm still here. I was just going off screen so she could do
Okay.
her reading. I didn't want, to interfere. I wanted y'all to
okay.
have, all the space.
I was like,
No,
okay, we can go off the cuff, no big deal, but we ran
no,
into the technical
No,
difficulty.
it's
I
fine. No,
was
I
about
was
to do your
actually.
reading now. That's why I disappeared. That was fun.
So let me introduce Gabrielle, and I can also just share how we met. We met during our birth class about a week before our sons were born. But I think that Gabrielle is highly understating who she is and how she can be, because I'm looking at your bio. So I'm going to read a little bit of it, and then I'm going to turn it to you to read an excerpt from your essay. So Gabrielle, she is she comes from a family full of doctors, artists, and teachers. So by training, it's natural. But her she was in Brazil after attending the infamous Spelman College. And her training in shamanic and ancestral healing was in Brazil. And she began her teaching career in Spain. So she is a global citizen of an educator. And her story is about her time in Brazil. And she is one of 25 contributors to this book. But Gabrielle's time in Brazil was marked by her integration into local holistic and shamanic healing communities. There, she was chosen to apprentice under senior community healers and was charged with assisting them in illuminating the wisdom of various spiritual traditions and ancestors for the benefits of all who seek inner peace and self-healing. Over the course of her ongoing apprenticeship, she became adept in a number of healing modalities, including Reiki, sound healing, plant medicine. She is a proud mother, and our sons Milo and Mayel are both Mai. And so she is a sister, mother, auntie, friend. And without further ado, I will introduce my friend Gabrielle.
teared up a little bit. Yes. Thank you so much. Sometimes we try not to overdo it when speaking about ourselves, but I appreciate you like making sure that folks kind of get a fuller picture of who I am. That really means a lot. And what I'll share with you all is how is, whenever we do readings, I'm like, gosh, where should I start? But I'm thinking I'll start kind of at maybe the juicier part, which was on the night of my 29th birthday. After having met a bunch of African American women that were kind of on their spiritual journey while we were all living in Brazil. This is when I first kind of got introduced to the world of the deep healing nature of plant medicine, and which has been the mainstay of and cornerstone of my work ever since. So on the night of my 29th birthday, we took a long journey to a shamanic community in the Atlantic forest. We took part in a night-long ayahuasca ceremony. It began as a frightening and confusing ride, but that gave way to intense visions that led to earth-shattering epiphanies. In one instance, I was able to see through the eyes of my father, who had never been present in my life. I saw that I saw what he had experienced in Vietnam and witnessed his heart literally contract inside his chest. At that point, I began to purge violently, but it wasn't nearly as terrible as it sounds. It was like letting go of the years of bitterness that his abandonment had calcified within me. I had never felt such a sense of relief in my life, and by morning I had experienced a 180-degree transformation, an awakening that brought me in tune with myself, the universe, and my purpose. Everything. I knew that this incredible medicine would be part of my life forever, but it wasn't until a few years later, after working closely and frequently with my shamans, that I would be asked to help others called to this healing path. And the rest of, what I share goes on to talk about, how I transitioned back to the States quite abruptly due to becoming pregnant with my then partner. And, Zika virus was rampant at that point in time, and which forced me to return here. And, that's kind of where I left my story, is how that transition brought me back home, and, how my healing journey continued. And it's just funny that we're now going through what seems to be the tail end, we don't know, of a public health crisis. And it's just interesting, just having read that little piece out loud, how these moments come full circle, for better or for worse. So
they do. And I see that Dizzy Bird 00 has a question. I'm gonna leave this to you, or let you lead this one. What cultural practices do you see becoming commonplace to support Black women in the future? I feel like you are a woman of practices.
Community-based practices, whole person practices, ancestral practices, things that our ancestors were doing, our more distant ancestors probably, and not engaging in cultural practices that don't overlook the most recent ancestors, but kind of look a little further back, and Sankofa a bit further back than perhaps we were told we should. So looking at just finding, going back and getting it, what is it that worked for, what got, for our more distant ancestors, what got them through enslavement, or what was it that our folks were doing even before enslavement? Who were we before we were an enslaved or colonized people? If you're speaking about, non-Western hemisphere Africans and Afro-descendants, anything from folks realizing that nuclear families don't really function very well, are not really the best setup for happiness, and thus going into community and mutual aid models that, harken back to the practices of our indigenous origins as Afro-descended people.
I love that.
Yeah.
I like get a new nugget every time I talk to you. I'm gonna come back to you. Well, if you want to answer this one, can you see?
Yeah, about if I could speak more on the nuclear family. I could go on for hours about that. I mean, I think it's just, unless you're, how do I say this in the least judgmental way, in the least biting way, because I have very strong feelings about it. I think the most recent years of the pandemic have shown us what some of our more crunchy brothers and sisters like myself have kind of tapped into, which is the fact that if we want to go fast, we go alone. If we want to go far, we go together. Um, the nuclear family was an invention of capitalist America, right? This is not a natural way to live. Living super isolated from family, living super isolated from one another, or in the case of like child rearing adults, doing it as a duo, or even worse, as a unit, as a single parent, with very little interlocking systems of care. um, you know it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It takes very little for a strong family unit to dissolve, to go through change, catastrophic change at times, and destabilize our life structure. And it's no surprise. It's never been, a surprise that as human beings, we can expect that we're going to get sick at some point, we're going to need help at some point, and we're going to get elderly at some point, God willing, and we're going to die. And I think the American dream and this whole notion of optimism at all costs, mixed with a little bit of hubris and like just capitalist delusion about like what life is about, has led us to this weird place in the last 2-3 generations. Starting I think with my grandparents' generation around the 50s and stuff. You know People started to spread out and move away from each other. Families didn't live all on the same block or anymore. People were, after the almighty dollar, and kind of just coalesced around father, mother, kids, or what have you. And all it took into account was this very narrow notion of success as the motivation for structuring life this way. But then it ignores the fact that like we are human beings, and we're not just here put on earth to produce and be successful. Like, we're here just to literally experience life, and part of life is the ups and the downs, birth, death, etc. And we can't do it alone. Never have been. Like, anthropologically, biologically, psychologically, that's just not how we're built, to rely on one other person, or for children to rely on two people or one person, or we're meant to be living in multi-generational households. We're meant to be living in villages where one person's house is right next to another, because life is dynamic and unpredictable, and being able to count on each other, it's essential. And the nuclear family doesn't allow for that. And that's like our default structure. And those of us that exist outside of it, I think, are the first ones to know that it just really doesn't work. But come hell or high water, even folks that are in nuclear families that are functioning well right now, all it takes is one bad day not to be morbid, but all it takes is one bad day for too much weight to be put on another one of the family members, or for there to be no one to catch the weight at all when the chips are down. And so we have to have multi-layered family structures. We need to return to that in order to like live our best lives and like in capitalism, et cetera, et cetera.
That's beautiful. Thank you for double clicking on that, Dizzy, and I appreciated that. And you know that hit home. Yeah. So I'm gonna ask you one question that Michaela asked me, which is, I do think that if y'all pick up the book, the remainder of your essay kind of hints at this. But what are you willing to sacrifice or compromise to get to the life that you desire?
Ooh. In the midst of that, I'm asking myself that question, and life is asking me that question. And I think what life is beckoning me to give up is my comfort.
Mm-hmm.
But it's challenging because I'm already so uncomfortable. I'm like, I'm Black in America and a woman and a single mom. Like, is that not enough for you? Like, how much comfort do I have to give up? But it's not giving up comfort just for comfort, for the sake of it. It's just literally because to get to the point of even knowing my purpose and hearing the call and like being in the flow enough for me to be at a point where I call myself a medicine woman and to take on the training and to be like, all right, cool, I've got my life's purpose. I had to completely leave my country, my home. I had to get completely out of my comfort zone. And so now I'm asking myself, will it require that I do that again in order for me to like level up in that, for me to stand up in that and like make it crack, as they say, you know? So I think as far as that concerned, probably comfort. Am I willing to give it up? I'm negotiating with my ancestors and with the universe, because I'm kind of at this point where I'm like, you can just give me the things now, because I'm you know,
Yeah,
you know, like no, I've given up a lot already. You know, in theory, I've given up a whole family to become a healer. You know, one of the reasons why I'm so adept at what I do is because I have lost a lot and I've been through like 5 lifetimes worth of pain. You know, not to quantify it or anything. You know, we all go through our things, but I've had kind of an exceptional path that's been filled with a lot of loss, and it was revealed to me that like part of the reason for that was to become a healer. You know, and so it's like I've given up almost anything because I've already given up so much to get to this point, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, and as far as what I would give up in order to the part of the life that I want is not just my my purpose in terms of my healing work and being a healer and like making that as big and bold as I can in my life. Part of it is being who I need to be for my son to be as happy as he can possibly be. So I'm having to give up a lot of old patterns. I'm having to be outside of my comfort zone in terms of my emotional regulation. And I'm having to give up, old patterns that have been holding me back. And some of them die hard, you know. But I'm super willing to give that up so that my son can have the mom that he needs.
It's funny that you were not on the portion with me and Michaela, because she asked me that question, and I said the same thing. I said comfortability and convenience for the risk of pursuing purpose. So that resonates with me, and I had a conversation maybe last month where you were saying, to that Jones girl, purposeful thing, yet how much more. Someone told me you've been through enough bad that you deserve, been through enough hard things that you deserve some good to come easy. And so I impart that to you as well.
Let it rain down. I receive.
Yes.
I received that, and like I'm saying that out loud, and I think obviously there are some things that I need to align that maybe are not in alignment, but like
Yeah.
I'm very much ready to receive that, and but also I've been also sitting with the notion of how much are like what is promised.
Mm.
Um, I've been in a really interesting space of really trying to sit with discomfort and old things coming up again and things from my past kind of triggering and all of that, and me still trying to see the forest for the trees where I'm at. And I kind of came also to the realization, this fabulous life is not promised.
Yeah.
I had to really sit with that one. You know, we can manifest and mind over matter and dream big and do all of that. And yet, and still, like, life is it's a great mystery.
Mm-hmm.
There is no definitive um, text or scroll somewhere or that guarantees us this life,
Mm-hmm.
that we want and think we should have and should have. Um, and so it's been very interesting to hold in one hand the truth that, planting good seeds can bear good fruit. You got to manifest. You got to, your ancestors dreamed of you. There's a purpose. There's all of this. And then you have to also kind of hold that lightly in one hand and also hold. And yet here we are in this grand universe and nothing is a guarantee. Nothing is actually promised to us. So it's just been something that's, I'm sitting at the intersection of those things right now. And just really seeing
Mm-hmm.
how that fits, how that works
Mm.
for life.
Yeah. So the next question is for you. We're on a roll for the Gabby 101.
Yeah.
So I feel like strong women who are healers find it harder to find a partner. And what's been your experience on your own?
Oh, girl. I mean, yeah, absolutely. That's just my perspective. I know plenty of amazing, strong healer women who are partnered, and I know plenty that aren't. I can only speak for myself personally. Yeah, for sure.
Mhm. Yeah. And I imagine, there's just so much work. There's such a responsibility as a healer to put your output is a lot. And
Mhm.
I imagine it being so positively depleting, but depleting in its own way. And
Mhm.
so sometimes, you know, when I think about when I've, been unpartnered and transitioning into partnered, the prerequisite of me healthily transitioning into partnership is me fueling myself, you know? And so the something to nibble on too.
Yeah,
And so it's like as a healer, you're balancing responsibility to yourself with responsibility to your community.
yeah. The healer has to heal themselves first,
Mhm.
always. And yeah, the output is just immense. not to mention, like, we have to be like Instagram, like marketing experts and a million other things.
Not to mention being an educator of
Not to mention,
children
like, yeah,
and a
like
mother.
and a mom, oh, like a single mom, yeah. And so, but me personally, my scenario is a little unique in that, um, not that I have like I carry the most weight of or have the most to do, but I just from what I observe around me, I'm like, wow, I have a lot going on, a lot on the plate. Um, and so, yeah, I do think it's been harder, but as a healer, I mean, I became a healer by working through my own stuff, and
Mhm,
I got really good at being a healer because I had a lot of issues.
mhm,
And because of that, it's like these things don't just heal automatically overnight. And I had a lot of my own issues come up in the starts of relationships that I've seen over the years. And so by virtue of being a healer and a really good one, I got here by being a deeply flawed human being that has these things coming up and is having to like deal with them and go into the shadow work. So a lot of my relationships, however short lived, have really just shown up as mirrors for me to kind of
mhm.
get my shit together. But
Precious.
do we have to be alone, or is it essential that we be alone? Or the second part of the question, I think absolutely not. I should hope
Yeah.
not.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm a person for whom romantic partnership is very important. Unfortunately, that's not something that has come into my orbit yet. But I don't, unless you really, really want to be, I think everyone should hopefully be able to find a place and time when they can have at least some of that, at least for a reason, a season, a lifetime. But
Mhm, mhm,
I don't think that we're so like elevated or lofty or just so evolved that no one is can meet us there. It's like
right.
sometimes you kind of gotta figure out what's most important to you, and yeah, realize that like there's gonna be a smaller pool of people that you're gonna really vibe with once you're not letting certain things into your life anymore.
Mhm.
But that's not really a bad thing. But it does make it harder. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Hi, Michaela.
I'm back. Hi, yes. So we're coming to the end of the talk, the fireside chat. But if you wanted to make like one last comment or one last question to Gabrielle or vice versa before we head out, we can do that.
Sure. I just want to thank you. This has been beautiful. Thank you, Gabby, for joining us. And for me, this I think about just the timing of this event and this talk on Women's History during Women's History Month, because for me, this is like my personal women's history, like packaged in. So I'm just immensely grateful to Sankofa for recognizing that and seeing um, just the intention of this book for what it was. And thank Gabrielle for helping manifest the intention by contributing.
Yes. Thank you so much for giving this space for us to do this. Thank you, Michaela, so much for for convening us. This is amazing. Y'all go and get the
Yes,
book.
I think I saw the little ticker. Let me put that back there again. While I'm saying my thank yous as well. So thank you so much to the audience for being here, and you could have been anywhere else. So thank you for spending your time with us. Thank you so much to Chloe and to Gabrielle for the same thing. Time is so precious. We don't take it for granted here. So thank you for being with us and talking about Life I Swear, which can be purchased in our store across the street from Howard or online at www.sankofa.com. This has been very illuminating, ladies, really. And I know that everyone watching has gained a lot. And if anything, it's just very healthy and nice to hear about other people's experiences, other Black women's experiences. So thank you so much, and
Thank
happy
you.
Women's History Month.
Thank you. Happy Women's History Month.
I hope everyone has a great evening. Goodbye, y'all. Have a good night.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all. Bye bye.